All right, good morning, Dad.
Good morning.
So today is Monday, September 15th, and I want to start off just by sort of building off what we talked about last Friday. I was expressing my frustration about why these countries in the Middle East, why aren't they doing something? The Gaza's right there. These are your brothers, your fellow Sunni Muslims, your neighbors, and nothing was happening. And then I just started thinking a little bit about it over the weekend. I realized that I shouldn't be thinking that way. Just how scary it has to be for everybody in that region. Um, I just don't think I really thought about it because I just see what's happening in Gaza. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, you guys have to do something. But then I'm just thinking about myself here. I have a family, a young family. If you're somebody living in the Middle East and you're starting a family and you have this crazy neighbor like Israel, where
Uh-huh.
it's bombed 6 countries in 3 days in the region and it's committing this genocide and it has no regard for international law and it has the United
hmm
States giving it cover no matter what. Just how terrifying it has to be if you are, for example, an Iranian that's there, they know that this war is coming. They're just waiting for it. They know it's
hmm
going to happen. And you know that Israel has nuclear weapons. And you know they have no regard for human life. And we've talked about this so many times that, how is this going to end? This will probably end, at least I think, with Israel with its back against the wall and threatening to use the Samson option, the nuclear option. And just thinking about if you're in Tehran, and we've already seen what happened in Lebanon, if you're in Beirut,
hmm
just that level of fear. You know what I mean? I don't know if I could. I just it just kind of hit me a little bit over the weekend. I was just thinking about it. I'm like, it's not fair for me to say like, why don't you guys stand up and do something? Just how scary it is for you if you're in that region. Your first duty is like, I have to protect my own family, my own people here. It's so awful what's happening there. We need to stand up. We need to stand up to what's happened to Israel. But I just wanted to say that like, it's easy for me to say, you
hmm
guys do something. Because I saw somebody left a comment saying that like, well, if Egypt tries to do something, that Colonel Douglas McGregor said that, he thinks that Israel might blow up the Nasser Dam, which would just flood millions of people in Egypt, just catastrophic. And you just think like, and when you hear that, it just seems like, yeah, that's something that Israel would do. They seem to show that they could do anything. And then I just been thinking about the people in the Middle East as well and thinking they must be thinking like me saying like, why don't you guys do something? They're probably like, why don't you do something? You're in America.
Right.
It's your country that's enabling this and doing this to us. You destroyed so many people already through your sanctions and your actions and your backing of Israel. Why don't you do something? Which, many of us are wanting to do something, but it just feels like what can we do? There's so many people that are protesting. Obviously, this isn't, people in America don't want this. A lot, even, conservatives that you maybe not don't care about the Middle East or anything. They are adopting more of an America first policy. Nobody wants this, but it just continues forward. So it just feels
hmm
like we're all trapped. We in America, we are supposedly a democracy, but we don't really have our voices concerned. It just seems like the elites do what they want to do. And the people in the Middle East, they're just being threatened by Israel and the United States constantly. Like if they stand up and say, no, you have to end this genocide, we're going to intervene, you know what they're going to do? They're already bombing all these countries nonstop. What will they do? It's just such a terrifying situation. Anyways, I just wanted to say, like, I just kind of recognize that, and
hmm
I'm frustrated. I get frustrated at like, why isn't anybody doing it in the Middle East? And I just understand a bit that it's just Israel's just out of control, and they're gonna kill. They've killed so many people, and they're just going to keep on killing more and more if anybody tries to stop them. But we have to stop them. But it just,
hmm
yeah, I don't know if I have a
Yeah.
question here, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. No, no. I think that you're right. Again, there is a legitimate reason to be reluctant, to become involved in a military conflict with Israel. That's just putting it very, very, I think, conservatively. Yeah. Um, where a lot of people criticize Iran, for example, for being so cautious, and then
Like me,
for
I did.
yeah, right, and then for agreeing to a ceasefire, they should continue. But the point is, like, if Iran continued, if they had continued, and then eventually Israel found its back against the wall, um, yeah, I think there's really no reason um, to doubt that they would at least consider and probably would go nuclear. And then, who pays the price? You're cheering on Iran, but it's not you that pays the price. It's the people living in Tehran and other cities in Iran. And that's something they have to think about. It's one reason why they need to proceed cautiously. Now, you think about the one country that has really stood up for their brothers in Gaza, of course, is Yemen. But they have paid the price. They continue to fight. They don't give up. And I think we all tremendously respect them. But just, recently Israel has been launching these strikes on Sana'a, the capital. And, of course, there was that devastating decapitation strike that took out the prime minister and, most of the top officials of the government there. But they've also been striking, all kinds of civilian targets, hospitals, the things like they do in Gaza. The other day, they killed 50 journalists in one strike there in Sana'a, so they're paying the price. You say, okay, they know they've decided that it's worth it, but I don't think you can expect that of every people, and it doesn't mean that they're cowards or whatever if they don't want to become involved, if they're reluctant. But I think you can still criticize a lot of those very, strongly criticize many of the governments in the Middle East because they can do things short of a military intervention. They can, they can up their rhetoric. They all indulge in a certain amount of rhetoric against Israel, but they can become even more forthright. They can cut relations, like the UAE can pull out of the Abraham Accords. They can and they can impose economic sanctions. They can do a lot of things short that really would hurt Israel and would, apply the pressure. So I think it's fair to criticize them, but yeah, military intervention. This even, sometimes, wonder, well, why doesn't Russia become involved or China? All these countries understand that if you actually attacked Israel, became involved or, involved in a war with Israel, then you're taking on the United States. And so, you're asking Russia to actually start World War III. And again, you can understand why they don't want to do that. Now, again, I think as you admitted towards the end there, or, you've acknowledged it earlier too, I know, it really is the one country that really can change things is the United States. Because Israel is reliant on the United States. It couldn't do what it's doing. It could not engage in this completely lawless behavior that it's engaging in if it weren't for unconditional American support. And, the day that ends, then we're going to see a different Israel. Now, it's always possible that they just would go, just choose a suicidal path and just start to go nuclear, sooner rather than later, because they still have that capability regardless of the Americans. But I think even with Netanyahu, he understands well enough that, he needs the Americans and he would pull back. So it's really, if there's one country that can make a difference, it's our country. I think there's no question about it. It's the U.S.
But we can't, not with this current administration. It just seems very clear to me now that Netanyahu has Trump completely under his thumb. And it sounds like it's from fear. Did you see that Gray Zone article from Max Blumenthal? Well, I didn't read the article. I should have, but I listened to the interview with Tim Dillon interviewed Max Blumenthal about the article. And it was a very interesting interview, but it just was saying that Trump feared for his life because he thinks that Israel could kill him. We would kill him, that there's a real fear there. And it's just that fear is so pervasive now. I mean, it's been throughout the Middle East, right? Everybody's worried. What is Israel going to do here? Are they going to bomb my capital now? And nobody's safe. Tunisia, Qatar, it's insane. And then, with the Charlie Kirk assassination, I don't have any evidence. I don't understand, what happened. But there's, Tyler Robinson is not confessing. He's not admitting to anything. I need to, like I said, I need complete transparency to be able to feel comfortable that this was not Israel, because my default position right now is that I believe that Israel is some way behind this, because everything seemed too coordinated. Everything around this is fishy. Like, they said they found the gun wrapped in a towel. It's like, okay, let me see the body cam footage of when they found that. Where is it? They just tell us these things without us actually hearing any of the or seeing any of the primary sources. Everything just seems to be piecemeal and fabricated, and it doesn't make sense. People are saying, oh, he was living at home with his parents and his father turned him in. Then said, oh no, he has a transgender or transitioning roommate and that's his lover, and that's what. Nothing just seems to make sense. And then and then you just see the Israelis like, here's a mural that we have 2-3 hours after he's dead. It's done. It's painted. I don't think they had it ready to go, but it just seemed like they, there's a segment on Fox News and how Charlie Kirk stands with Israel, even though we know that Charlie Kirk was fearing for his life from Israel, apparently from two separate sources. That Harrison Smith guy from InfoWars, he's the one that first said it on, I think, August 13th, that someone close to Charlie says that he thinks Israel will kill him if he turns against them. And then Max Blumenthal, his source inside, also had confirmed the same thing, that Charlie was afraid and was under incredible pressure from the Zionists. And these were two separate sources confirmed by Harrison Smith. So these are two separate people. So just, and I think even if it isn't true, that there are enough people in the world and in America that will believe this, that will just say that, yeah, I think Israel probably was behind this, unless you can show us absolute proof that it wasn't. And maybe that's what was maybe the significance of his death, is that in a sense it's brought that fear closer to home, maybe for a lot of people, realizing that, like, is this a message you're sending to our politicians, Trump, that you better do everything we do or we'll kill you, because we specialize in assassinations. You see what we do. We don't care about anybody. We kill women, children, politicians, negotiators, no regard. We'll kill 100 innocent people to get one maybe supposed person of interest, And so, anyways, if we're living in this world of fear, something that's so kind of Machiavellian strategy by Netanyahu, I think it's effective for a little while, but that never can never last, right? It has, you can't rule by fear forever.
No, I agree. Yeah, in the long run, it's going to, I think, will lead to the destruction, to the fall of Israel. But in the short run, you'd have to say this has been an effective strategy, for the reasons that you put forth. Everyone's afraid, including apparently the President of the United States. I read the same media reports, and I read the Gray Zone article by Max Blumenthal and by his wife Anya. He says that, well, Trump, actually, I guess it was during I guess maybe it was the most recent Netanyahu visit, the Secret Service discovered the Mossad, or maybe a similar agency of the Israeli government, actually placing electronic devices. It didn't explain exactly what they were, but I think must have been some kind of listening devices in the first responder vehicles of the Secret Service, of the U.S. Secret Service, right there at the White House. And this is not the first time this kind of thing has happened. I saw a story that was really kind of funny, that Netanyahu, when Boris Johnson was still Prime Minister of England, yet Netanyahu visited him. They're great pals, at least publicly, and Netanyahu asked him, for the use of Boris Johnson's private toilet, and used it, and then shortly thereafter it was discovered that there was a listening device in there. So anyway, the Brits actually suspect that Netanyahu himself placed one in his toilet, which is so anyway, these people, they're all so chummy in front of the cameras, but we know that there was real hatred. Again, there was that hot mic moment, when Sarkozy and Obama, were caught discussing Netanyahu. Yeah, I hate the guy. It's just everybody agreed, but they all pretend to be the best of friends. And I think in addition to the hate, there's some real fear. These decapitation strikes and assassinations. Assassinations have been something that the Israelis have done since before the State of Israel. So the very high-profile assassinations were conducted even before, and it's been a part of their modus operandi for quite a while. Now it's been expanded through these decapitation strikes, and I think it causes some legitimate fear. You're thinking, like, what won't these people do? If I stand in the way, they'll probably come for me. And In the short run, it can work. I think in the long run, people, different powers start to think of ways that how can we take them down? We just can't live with this. This is something, this country, this government has to go.
Right. I mean, don't you think shouldn't people already be doing that within the U.S. government? This is supposed to be our closest ally, but if the president of the United States actually is afraid of his life because he thinks that Israel could kill him if he steps out of line, like, don't you think you are the president of the United States? This is supposed to be the most powerful country in the world. You're supposed to have unlimited resources. If Israel's supposed to be a rabid attack dog and it's turning on you, then you shoot the dog, right? It's rabid. It's out of control. So do you think that's a chance that there will be enough people with integrity that can stand up and
right.
release?
In the near term, I don't see it happening. I just said, I think there's probably a lot of cognitive dissonance going on right now. It's just like everybody has, all these people have convinced themselves that, Israel is their greatest friend and, our best ally in the Middle East, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But they are becoming aware of these things and observing these behaviors, including like the recent attack on Qatar, which is actually a country very close to the U.S., not exactly an ally, but you could describe them as a friend, and one that is, recently has shown extreme generosity to the U.S. and to the president of the U.S. in particular, and so that has to create a certain amount of cognitive dissonance. But people, it's hard for, I think some people, a lot of those people just will never change their minds, no matter what, no matter how much evidence is presented to them. It's just become like part of who they are, part of who they are is that they believe in Israel and that Israel is always right. And just think about Stalin supporters in the Soviet Union who went to their deaths still, because of orders issued by Stalin, but still praising, the great leader. They didn't understand what was going on, but, they just couldn't give up. That was just part of who they were. They were believers in Stalin. And I think you have people like that in the U.S. government, except they don't believe in Stalin. They believe in Zionism. And unfortunately, there are too many of them. But, at the edges, not everybody is like that. There are people that are more reasonable. We have evidence that Charlie Kirk was starting to wake up. We don't know how far he would have gone, but, he had some awareness and he was beginning to change his views. And that's probably happening to other people. Now, I don't think we'll see any real results in the near term, but it's part of this process. We see it happening, much more rapidly outside of the political class. Again, the opinion polls show an astounding shift in attitude towards Palestine and Israel within the general population, especially the younger population. And just a seismic change has taken place. Now, the political class is different, and we're just seeing things on the edges now. But I think, I think all the evidence is that in the long run, the support for Israel is going to dry up, and there is going to be a real reaction, and then Israel is going to be in real trouble. Now, I don't know how long that will take. It's going to be a matter of years. Again, these things can happen much faster than you expect sometimes, because you're so used to, the status quo that you start to think the status quo is going to last forever, but it never does. And when it falls, it often falls very suddenly. So who knows? It may not be too far in the future. But then also I can be amazed, saying that, okay, now the status quo has got to fall, and the status quo just persists. It can go on a lot longer than you think it should. So that's the timing is just very, very hard to predict. But I am confident that in the end, the support for Zionism in the U.S. will end, and we're just seeing the beginnings of that end now.
Yeah, I think the issue that Netanyahu has is that he needs to move quickly while he still has some level of support. But the quicker he moves, the quicker he loses his support. But he has a lot of timelines that he's trying to fit in together. He's got his corruption, his own health and life, the political charges against him. And then, just the fact that he knows support is dropping out. So it's like, I think in his mind, he's just got to go for broke now, right? He just says, let's just use up all that support now. We know it'll drain down, but we just got to go now.
Right.
So I
Right.
think this has to happen soon. This big all out brawl in the, I don't know what it's going to be exactly. I mean, I think it's probably going to be another missile war with Iran, and then it's just going to be, what does the U.S. do? Are we going Samson option? I think it's coming soon. I just feel like it's coming, but I have nothing to back it up.
Yeah,
Just
yeah,
my
right.
feeling.
For some reason, everybody thinks, like, I hear all these different analysts, people I very highly respect, and they all seem to be sure that it's going to happen before the end of this year. The next phase of the Iran is Israel war, and I can't say that they're wrong. It's just that I don't see any evidence right now pointing to a renewal of the conflict. Now, there's always a chance that the absence of evidence doesn't prove that another attack isn't being planned. Maybe this time the Israelis are just going to come, out of nowhere. Actually, the previous attack, we had a sense that something was on the horizon, something was going to happen pretty soon. It just happened quicker than we expected and quicker than the Iranians expected, so they were taken by surprise. But there were many signals and leaks and, suggesting that, an attack was imminent, was going to happen within days or, at the most weeks. And then it did happen. We're getting nothing like that now. And so it's hard for me to believe that there's anything imminent. Again, maybe this time they're just going to pull it off, without warning. But that would be unusual. A major war with generally countries, including Israel, when they prepare for a major war, they want to have the element of surprise, but they also want to prepare their allies and their own people for it. And kind of like they do what they call those shaping operations, or that's the kind of the various kind of operations that prepare for an attack. We're talking about something purely military when we're talking shaping, artillery strikes and that kind of thing. But they do their kind of the equivalent within the information space, a shaping operation to prepare for the attack. And that's been the pattern anyway in the past. It was certainly what preceded the attack on Iran in June. And remember, it was preceded by that report issued by the IAEA. That just like the next day it happened. It was part of they were working to kind of delay the information groundwork, the justification for the attack. They were careful to do that, and I just don't see any signs of that happening now.
Mm-hmm. I'm just wondering how we still have politicians that are in support of Israel. Do you think it's mostly, I feel like more people are supporting Israel out of fear now. Do you think so than actual true belief? Because I feel like even people like Mike Huckabee, that's been a true believer, it's just like, I have a feeling like deep down inside, you gotta know that there's something wrong. I mean, he expressed a few little words of concern when, Taipei, the Christian village, was attacked. And there were some, and then after they killed some American in the West Bank, and he expressed a couple words, but I just feel like you gotta know, or maybe he just wants a holy war and that's his position. But I just feel like most people that are power, I just don't understand how anybody could be like, what Israel's doing is okay, and you feel supportive of it. If anybody is saying how great Israel is and support everything they're doing, to me, it just, if you're a prominent figure and you're that close to the reality of what Israel is doing, for me, I just feel like you're compromised. I understand the Christian Zionist evangelicals, they're far away. They're spoon-fed their narrative and their belief, and they're fed whatever they see on Fox News. But I mean, if you're somebody that's high up in the administration, you deal with them. I mean, look what just happened after Charlie Kirk got assassinated. Marco Rubio and some other American officials go over and kiss the wall, and they're wearing the kippah and everything. It's like, what is this? Right after the assassination, you go over here and pledge your allegiance to Israel. You know that this is not a positive look, that this is not what people want to see in America, yet they do it. And then Brian Mass introduces a bill, to say that if you criticize Israel, then the Marco Rubio can revoke your passport. Like, that's
Right.
insane. I
Yeah.
mean, like, think about us. We're very critical of Israel. My sister, your daughter lives in Moscow. You want to be able to travel. What if they just say, what if our podcast gets big enough and they say that this is a voice that we need to silence? You can't travel. No, sorry, take your passport. I can't go back to China. I can't do it. It's like, that's just nuts because I criticize Israel, a country that is engaged in a genocide. It's not even my country. It's a country on the other side of the world that are killing women and children that's being live streamed to us on our phone, and you will take away my passport. This is just so absurd. It's so absurd that I just don't understand how anybody now can, unless you just completely have your head in the sand, or you're compromised. I mean, like, that's my opinion. I just feel like that I feel like Mike Huckabee, like maybe he's just an extreme believer, but he's probably compromised too. I just think all of these guys, the way they got into power is that, the Zionists find them, they get them compromised, and then they help them get to the top. And then if they start to sway, move away, then they'll kill you, like they did Charlie Kirk, in my opinion.
Okay. Yeah, well, I think that Mike Huckabee is a true believer. I mean, he did make those comments, but you noticed that he has expressed a concern about attacks on Christians in Palestine. He did express concern about the killing of the American citizen, but these are very specific cases, and these are exceptions to the rule. He has never, I think, uttered a word of concern, to my knowledge, about Muslims, the hundreds of thousands, really. I think there's no doubt about it, but let's just say even tens of thousands of Muslims that have been killed by Israel. He just does not seem to care. I haven't seen any evidence of it. And I think, there is a real consistency there with Mike Huckabee. He's simply a Christian Zionist, and I think it causes him to shut his eyes, but then I think really shut down a part of his heart. He just doesn't have compassion for those other people. He probably really does believe, like the extreme Zionists within Israel, that these people are not fully human, or they deserve to die, or killing them is no crime, and in fact it's something to it's somehow blessed by God or something. Everything, his actions, his words, seem to reflect that extreme Christian Zionist belief that he has. So anyway, I don't think we need to look for anything else in the case of Mike Huckabee. Now, let's see. Oh, I just also wanted to point out, recently, I think it was, like you said, it was Marco Rubio that proposed, right? Actually, was it Marco Rubio? It was
Brian Mass.
Brian Mass, right? Yeah. Okay, yeah, it was Brian Mass who proposed that, and that was a worry that I expressed, I think, at least a couple of months ago, because we're seeing those crackdowns. The immigration authorities, ICE, were grabbing people on visas here in this country, not U.S. citizens, but people who had been critical of Israel, and just simply grabbing them, sometimes right off the streets, and putting them in jail, separating families, that kind of thing. And I said, okay, well, let's be completely honest, fair, and acknowledge that in that case, what they're doing. Well, there is an issue about it, but okay, let's just put it this way: it is understood that non-U.S. citizens, do not have a right to be in the U.S. A visa is not a constitutional right. You can revoke a visa. Now, there's some other questions about free speech and, the grounds on which you revoke the visa. And we don't need to get into that now. But just very broadly speaking, they're not U.S. citizens, so a different standard applies to them. But I expressed my worry at that time that, that distinction wouldn't hold, and eventually there would be a push. You see this really concentrated, kind of zealous, vicious effort to seize these people, for their so-called anti-Semitism, their criticism of Israel. Is it going to just stay there, among those, visa holders, or is it going to be extended to U.S. citizens? And right now, we're seeing an effort to extend, the same kind of treatment to U.S. citizens.
Yeah, well, you called it then. Do you think, but I mean, surely that won't pass, right? I mean, if
I
it
don't.
passes, just think about how then it just becomes so blatant at that point.
Mhm.
Americans, I mean, I don't, you'd have to be really, really ignorant or just completely captured by Zionist ideology to think that somehow this is good, that
Right.
this is a good idea.
Yeah. The problem, of course, is within the U.S. Congress. I don't know how many of them are actually captured by Zionist ideology. Certainly, a considerable proportion are. But as for the rest, yeah, I think you can say the great majority are captured by Zionist money and like you say, a certain amount of fear for whatever reason. So there would be no popular support for this. There would be maybe there are 20% of the population is just fervently Zionist and is going to support anything. But the great majority of people would say, "Hey, this is wrong. We're U.S. citizens. This is our passport. What are you doing? This is you can't do this. And we do have these free speech rights." But we often see, that the way Congress votes has very little to do with the way that people think. So it's not. I don't see it happening now. But it's just like if things get worse in Israel, this maybe as Israel's position becomes increasingly precarious in the Middle East and the attacks on it, from other countries. I'm not talking about military attacks, but just, maybe economic sanctions, et cetera, perhaps begin to grow over time. I think that you'll see the Zionist forces in this country becoming increasingly desperate and, reckless, just the way that Netanyahu himself is being reckless within Israel. And we could see an attempt to do that, and it could even succeed. They'll really, because again, they have so much control over the political class.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll see how far it goes. I think the overarching strategy that the Zionists have is to kind of frame what's happening in the world as just this civilizational battle between Western civilization and, I don't know, barbarians and the hordes. And you see very prominent people that are on board. And this way they kind of detaches it from what Israel's doing. It's like, oh, well, we're fighting the same type of enemy, and you see people like Elon Musk, for example. You saw that giant, huge protest in the UK. Elon Musk spoke at it, and he was saying things like, you have to fight back or die. You got to take your country back. This type of rhetoric. First of all, I don't. It seems like he's really kind of taken up this crusade of the idea of what Western civilization is, and somehow framing it a bit as in that we have these Muslim invaders. That's kind of how roughly they're trying to frame it. And who knows, that might be partially successful, because I can understand the resentment in many of these countries as well, where they see all of a sudden the makeup of their whole country has changed dramatically over the past 10 years, and they don't fully understand what's going on. Well, what's going on is that Israel and the United States are blowing up all these countries in the Middle East, and they don't have homes. So where do they go? They have refugees. They can't. They're all refugees. They're spread all over the world. It's horrific. So the problem is it all comes down to Israel, but they're using that. I think the fact that they have created this
Mhm.
refugee crisis to kind of fuel that narrative of this is a battle between, look, they're coming for you too. It's like, well, no, they're coming here because you blew up their homes. That's what
Mhm.
happened, right?
Yeah, to a great extent, not in every case, but certainly to a great extent, that's the case. That's what's happening. You have a policy of, I've heard it described as um, stirring up a hornet's nest and then opening the window. Which you can see, of course, is that attacks on these different countries, creating chaos in places like Syria and Libya and so on and so forth. Which leads to the immigration flows quite naturally. And then at the same time, yeah, just removing immigration restrictions. And yeah, the consequences, I think, are obvious. It's a very unfortunate consequence. I can actually understand, again, like how many working class English people think that way. They don't really understand what's going on in the Middle East, but they see, yeah, they're their towns, their neighborhoods are transformed, and like any people in the world, say this is my home, but now it's no longer like home. And what's going on? Who are these people? They speak a language I don't understand. It's again, the working class tends to suffer from mass immigration in a way that wealthy people don't. Wealthy people say, oh, a new restaurant, that, and or new help for the garden or for the home. It's a completely, they actually tend to benefit from it on a level, but it's the working class that will pay the price. They lose their neighborhoods, but then also their wages are depressed because there's an increased a larger pool of workers that, again, the upper classes can draw from, and they find themselves competing with these new people. So if yeah, I think it's a huge mistake for them to support Zionism. It's wrong. It's an unfortunate, a real moral stain on those movements. But you see how it happens. You just hope you have more enlightened leaders. Again, like one group that is like immigration restrictionist within Europe, but is also anti-Zionist, is Sarah Wagenknecht's, her party, which unfortunately just fell short of the 5% in Germany, where she, I think, has a completely moral position on this. But she's the exception to the rule, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah, I think I don't think it's going to work on. I mean, it doesn't take too long once you hear the argument of like why there's so many people from the Middle East in our countries now. It's like, well, yeah, you understand what we've been doing over there the past 20 years, and then I think they can make that connection because I saw some videos of the protests where there were many people wearing British flags, and then there's people trying to wave Israeli flags too, and then somebody grabbed it and ripped it up and just like don't piggyback on our event. And we know what you're trying to do. And I hope that people there on that have that nationalist sentiment understand that and realize that, hey, Israel is your enemy. As they're not. They're trying to pretend that you Israel and you, the nationalists in the UK, have a common enemy in the Muslims. That's not true. So I hope they understand that. And I think they will. I just think that Israel's the mask is just completely off for Israel. It's just so out of control. Okay, well, let me just ask you one more question. We'll stick in the Middle East a little bit, but is there any doubt in your mind that Trump was in on the attack on Qatar?
Well, I think it's possible that he wasn't informed. I think it's because, again, he has such a chaotic administration. Perhaps the news that never got to him, but I doubt it. I think he probably knew. And I think certainly if he didn't know, which I think is highly unlikely, then certainly other people higher up did know, like within the Pentagon. I think there's no question about it because we see, every evidence of coordination. I haven't heard anybody, any attempt to refute the tanker refueling story. That would be a British air tanker. But in any case, they had to fly through airspace. And above all, I think the single most important point is that the U.S. has that air base right there with all those facilities, the radars and everything. They had to have known, and the Israelis had to tell them ahead of time about it. I don't see any other explanation.
Well, let's just see. I want to see what Qatar does. Are they just going to just say we're angry and that's it, or is there going to be some real action? What could Qatar do short of military action?
Well, they could do a lot. Like the biggest thing would be to kick the Americans out of Qatar, out of that military base.
Do you think they would do that?
They could. I don't think they will. I even have questions, like I've said, that they may have also been, the emir at least may have been told and made some sort of deal and let it happen. I don't think that's impossible at all. And, I'll be agnostic on that. But if, and again, I was just saying, we'll see, depending on what he does or doesn't do. I think it'll become clearer over time. If he if he was really serious about, yeah, about let's say asserting his own sovereignty, the sovereignty of Qatar, I think they would kick the Americans out, and they could invite the Chinese in, for example, if they're worried about the economic loss. You say, part of the reason is that they had the Americans in is that they thought they had protection from Israel, and it didn't work. So what are we doing here? So that could happen. I don't see why it couldn't happen, and that would be a major blow to the U.S. And I think there would be real anger, and it would really, I think, affect the thinking of again, the American elites. You just say, well, wait a second, we paid a real price for letting Israel do this. We need to, maybe we have to reassess, our support for Israel. We need to rein them in at least somewhat, But so far, there's been no talk of that. They're really, I don't know if anything will happen. Again, maybe he was in and on it at the beginning, or maybe he just, is going to be revealed to be a servile, vassal, just like the German leadership has proven itself to be.
Yeah. Well, if they did tell us to get out, would we just get out? I mean, wouldn't that be so humiliating and embarrassing for for America?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it would also be great. We shouldn't be there to begin with. Get them all out. Nobody. Right. Yeah, I just don't understand.
Yeah, I would hope good for America. A good.
Right. Yeah, keep us out of this war, but we're definitely going in. I feel like, but okay, well, maybe I shouldn't say definitely. Do you feel like that we are going to war with Iran? That Trump will do what he can to get us involved in this war? Because we just saw what happened between Israel and Iran. Israel can't do this, but they're going to do it, and so they have to bring us in, right?
Yeah, well, again, I pointed out that I don't see any evidence of it happening in the short run. I think clearly there are people within Israel and the U.S. that want to renew this conflict, but they're staying quiet for the time being. Now, Trump has made it clear that it's all over, right? That's been his position. He obliterated those nuclear facilities, and that's the end of the story. And he has not deviated from that line. And in fact, he's really doubled down. We had I believe it was the DIA director who was fired because he put forth a different interpretation. He said that actually Iran's nuclear program was not set back significantly. And so he's out of there. So anyway, at the present time, we don't see any indication from the U.S. government that they want to get back into this. Quite the reverse. The official story, it's all over. Now, if we start to see like a new version come out, then I think we can say, hey, they're planning something. But we're not seeing that now.
Right. Okay. So keep a lookout for something like, oh, Iran's in violation of some nuclear thing again. They're going for a bomb. Then we know it's coming.
Yeah. Yeah. We're really not hearing that at the present time.
That's true. Okay. All right. Well, is there anything else that you'd like to touch on in the Middle East? Like, what do you
maybe
think
just one
next?
Last thing. Again, we're talking about Iran and its nuclear program. I got some more information about the. Well, actually, it was the snapback sanctions. I had assumed that by renewing its relationship with the IAEA, Iran would make itself, would actually protect itself from the snapback sanctions. But that turns out not to be the case because the E3, those are the three European countries that were parties to the JCPOA, they put on three conditions. It wasn't just that Iran renew its relationship with the IAEA, but that also it let them know where all of the missing, enriched uranium was located, and then also, and this is the big one, really, I think, that they also need to renew negotiations with the U.S., which just seems so insane and just so just breathtakingly, unfair, really. After what happened, that you need to, these people who treacherously, set you up for this attack, you need to go back and start talking to them again. So I think anyway, it looks like, though Iran has renewed its relationship with the IAEA. It remains to see, remains to be seen exactly what that relationship will be. There are a lot of details to be worked out at this point. I don't see them actually going so far as to renew negotiations with the U.S. If they do, then I just say these people are hopeless. I'm not talking about the Iranians in general, but Pezeshkian and his people.
If he does, then I imagine there would be a lot of anger within Iran, right?
Yeah. Oh, certainly. Yeah. I would. Yeah. I think there's no doubt about it. I think there's already a fair amount of anger just over the fact that they're talking to Grossi and the IAEA.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it makes me angry. It's like,
yeah,
these guys, I can't trust them.
I'll withhold my judgment. I wish they wouldn't, but I understand it's like, again, they have to look at a larger picture. They may just absolutely detest these people, and Grossi in particular, but sometimes in diplomacy, you have to hold your nose and deal with despicable characters and sometimes do things, swallow your pride for the long-term interests of their country. And I'm not willing to, at this point, I'm not ready to say condemn what they've done. We'll see exactly what, how they hammer out the details of this relationship, and it may be they may work something out where they do not sacrifice any right or interest or of any substance. We'll see.
Okay. All right. Well, maybe we can move over to Russia. We can segue with some with the sanction talk. I'm going to show you actually a video clip. This is actually from a week or 10 days ago, but it ties in nicely with something that Trump said. I actually meant to share this with you last week, but I just didn't come around to it. So here, let's watch it real quick.
And if the U.S. and the EU can come in, do more sanctions, secondary tariffs on the countries that buy Russian oil, the Russian economy will be in full collapse, and that will bring President Putin to the table.
Well, there it is. Full collapse. But it sounds like, that was kind of teeing Trump up for this announcement he made earlier, just I think yesterday or 2 days ago. He said, I'm willing to do sanctions, but they're going to have to toughen up their sanctions, referring to the EU, commensurate with what I'm doing. Well, I'm ready to move ahead, but they have to do it. So he's arguing for Russia, for the EU to impose tariffs of up to 100% on China and India. Do you think there's any chance that they will actually do this, or that they actually believe that this will bring about the collapse of the Russian economy? It's just all we got to do is if we all stick together and do this together, then it will work. And basically Trump is saying, you guys go first and we'll go too. And then, but I just feel like if you say you go first, nobody's going to do it, right?
Yeah, right. Well, I think actually the EU has already said no. At least the important players within the EU said, no, we can't do this, which just shows that they were actually, they were urging Trump to go ahead and do it. But then when Trump came back and asked them to do it, they said, no way. They understand the consequences. One thing, I think that shows the value of, being firm from the start and not appeasing the enemy. Because when, of course, Trump started to slap all those sanctions on China, China immediately retaliated. They did not back down a bit. They didn't say, well, let's talk about it or whatever. They said, no, you can't do this. Bam, we're slamming them on. Bam, no more rare earths, and look, now they're actually scared of China. Not just the Americans, but the Europeans. And it's because China demonstrated its resolve. And I think there's a lesson, to be had there. I think maybe both the Iranians and Russians sometimes have been too soft, work too hard to be reasonable. Sometimes you have to show who you're dealing with. These people understand, they understand power and retaliation. Just show from the start that's what they're going to get if they try to go after you. So anyway, there's that. But now with this new letter, I think this was actually addressed to NATO and NATO members. And of course, there's a big overlap between the EU and NATO. So you're just wondering, well, this is the big question. There's a debate about this, not just within, let's say, the alternative media, let's say the geopolitical dissident media, but even within mainstream media about what the motivations are, what the strategy is here. And there are people in both the mainstream and in the dissident media who are arguing that Trump is actually bluffing here. This is the way he knows that Europe cannot go along with this. And but this is his way to act tough, but then not actually suffer the consequences. Now, again, to show Lindsey Graham and the other neocons back in the U.S. that, oh yeah, he's on their side, but at the same time, kind of pull the rug from under their feet and say, look, he'll prove to them that you can't do this, and that could be true, but you never know with Trump. If he was a deep strategic thinker and he had demonstrated that in the past, I would certainly believe that. Because that seems to be the effect of what he's doing right now. But with Trump, you just don't know. It may be that he actually wants these sanctions to go forward. Somehow he thinks that they could succeed, and he's pushing for it. But I think in any case, like even if that's what he's trying to do, it is a demonstration of weakness. Because if you were so sure of yourself, you would have gone ahead and done it on your own. But I think he's already realized, okay, that we can't do this. And that's why I think we in fact had the Alaska summit. It was that he had set this deadline for him. Then he realized, oh my God, what have I done? Let's get out of this. Send Witkoff to Moscow, arrange this meeting. And then they just, okay, we'll say we agreed to something. It's not clear what we agreed to, but there is no more talk of these secondary tariffs. I think he's aware of the weakness of the American position, and that's why he's, this is an alternative explanation. He's thinking, well, we can't do it on our own, but if we team up with Europe, then, the sanctions or the tariffs will really bite, and the Chinese will have to come, will cave in, and then the Russian economy will collapse, and so on and so forth. So it's either some sort of clever bluff, or it is just proof that he's aware of the weakness of the American position.
Our country we look like such buffoons the way that we're behaving. We're just, it's insane because, when Biden was president, it was just like, okay, who's in charge? This is nuts. And then now you got Trump, and somehow it's even more chaotic. It's even less clear who's in charge and who's doing what. It almost feels like everybody gets to kind of run their own part of the department. Marco Rubio, you want to go to war with Venezuela? Sure, go for it. Netanyahu, you want to blow up the Middle East? Sure. General Kellogg, you want to go to war with Russia? Okay, go ahead, do that thing. Who wants to go to war with Iran? All right, raise your hand. Everybody gets a war. Everybody gets to do whatever they want. And there's nobody in charge. It's like, I'm surprised at the weakness of Trump. Maybe it's his age. Maybe he's just compromised. Maybe he's just plain stupid. I just don't understand.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of people want to say like he's like, oh no, he is smart. There's no way he's not. But I'm just like, it's hard for me to see it, to be honest. And just the way that he talks and the decision making. It's just like, I don't know. I think maybe there's something that happened when there's so many sycophants around you for so long that you just, your farts smell like roses, and whatever. Everybody is just kissing your ass nonstop, that you just can't think right anymore.
Yeah, no, well, that's a real danger. I think, it's a danger actually in every administration and with every president, is that, you surround yourself with yes men. I think there's a natural tendency, and you don't want to hear the other side of things. That guy is the party pooper. He's the one that's raining on the parade. Let's get rid of him. So I think there is always that tendency, always that danger, but it has reached an extreme under Trump, because again, like I mentioned, the firing of the DIA director, and then there was also the head of the Department of Labor who put out the wrong statistics, that again, and she got fired. So I think, the
level
of...
She put out the wrong statistics. Did she actually, or just wasn't statistics that he liked, is what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's right. That's what it was. It was just so-called. I should put wrong in quotation marks.
Yeah, right.
Wrong according to Trump. So we see. I think the level of sycophancy is now higher than it's ever been, and that is a real danger. That is. And then you talked about, we just sort of contracting out different issues, different regions of the world to different people, and I think there's definitely quite a bit of evidence for that. Actually, the one place where he hasn't completely done that really is Russia, which I think he does have a real reluctance to continue to be involved. I don't think he wants to be there. And so what you get instead of really a coherent strategy to pull out of it is just a lot of chaos. So Kellogg is, clearly is with the neocons and wants to continue to prosecute this proxy war, to go, all out. He wants to escalate all that. I don't think there's any question about that. And he's certainly not the only one. I think, they may even be in a majority within his administration. But Trump himself he's not really, maybe he's not entirely against them, but he's not also entirely with them. And so you get a very chaotic strategy. There's just not, you hear contradictory statements from day to day, and you just don't know what the heck is going on. So anyway, that's the Trump administration.
It's scary though. It's dangerous because if you have, for example, I think Pete Hegseth is a complete sycophant. I think he, really admires Trump and will do anything he says and just wants to please Trump. And, you told me, on the start of the podcast, you're talking about how people that were going to their death in Russia in the gulags under Stalin, they were singing Stalin's praises right up to the moment that they were killed. And I feel like we have that kind of similar situation here, that they will be singing Trump's praises and they just have this belief that no matter what he does, somehow Trump just makes it happen and it works, and we just got to follow. So if he tells Pete Hegseth, we're going to war with Iran, move over all of our aircraft carriers, Pete Hegseth may disregard any just common sense, even though he has expressed acknowledgement before in a video I showed a long time ago about Pete Hegseth talking about hypersonic missiles and our ability to project power through our aircraft carriers is no longer there. And every single war game we have with China, we lose because they're able to sink all of our boats. He has to understand that this will happen to some extent with Iran. But I believe his level of sycophancy may be so high that it will override that common sense. And so that's what I'm just afraid of, is that he's surrounded by so many yes men that he lives in a false reality. He's afraid of Israel. He'll do what they want. And Pete Hegseth doesn't have the backbone to stand up to his Lord and Savior Trump, like that's what it's like,
Yeah. Well, yeah. And it's important to remember that in the past, under past administrations, the Pentagon, this may be counterintuitive for a lot of people, but the Pentagon is the one department of the U.S. government that has often put the brakes on the war plans of U.S. presidents. Again, because they have a better understanding of U.S. capabilities and the capabilities of the enemy. They understand what war really means, and often the civilians actually don't. They can actually be quicker to resort to military force than the Pentagon itself. So and we saw that again during the Biden years. It was often the Pentagon was the one that was trying to slow things down, trying not to escalate. And it was Biden and Blinken and the others that were always kind of champing at the bit and wanted to escalate quicker. But there's a danger under Trump because he has fired a lot of people. And it seems with him that the main issue is personal loyalty. So you end up getting rid of a lot of people. It's not just in the Pentagon, but in the State Department, and replacing those people with sycophants. That's a danger. Maybe not all of them are. I hope that's true, but that seems to be where we're headed. I know, like Chas Freeman, of course, who had a long and very illustrious career within the State Department, and also I think he did work for the Pentagon for a while. And he says that we're losing a lot of expertise. That there were a lot of people, maybe they did support bad policies in the past, but they actually really understand these regions really pretty well, and they understand how diplomacy works. And the smarter thing to do is, maybe there are a few that you have to get rid of. They're real ideologues. But a lot of them are not truly ideologues, and they can be convinced and understand it. It's their responsibility, their duty to work for a new policy, and they again have the expertise to make it really happen. You get rid of these people, get rid of too many of them, and you replace people, them with frankly incompetence and people who completely lack experience. They're only the only thing they have going for them in the eyes of Trump is that they're completely dedicated to Trump. Then you have a really dangerous situation. You're right. You just have we get to some sort of critical point of crisis. And in the past, okay, like in the case of Iran in the past, again and again, the Pentagon said, no, this is not smart. Let's back away from this because this is what might happen, and we could really suffer some very grievous losses. Let's not do this. Now you have all these, basically cheerleaders for Trump in charge. You may find that the brakes are no longer on the vehicle, and then we just go over the edge.
Oh boy. Is this something like analogous to Nero in Roman history? where things start getting crazy and you lose the Republic? I mean,
yeah.
I know we haven't been a
it
Republic
is.
for a long time.
There's no question that we're seeing, I think, the decline, and I think eventual demise of our democracy. Because
it's already dead.
Okay,
right?
really, I should say the Republic. It's just that, that these institutions that have been built up over time. Well, I don't want to put all the blame on Trump. I don't put all the blame on Trump. Part of the problem is that they had been corrupted and used for nefarious purposes, by previous administrations or during his first term, against Trump himself, the whole Russia hoax. And that's part of, if you want to point a finger of blame, I think you certainly have to point there. It's not like these problems all started with Trump. There was real corruption, there was real politicization of these departments. So, Trump really is faced with a quandary and saying, okay, how do I clean out these Augean stables? How do
the what?
Okay, well, that's it's a classical reference there. It's difficult. It's an extremely difficult task, is what it means.
Oh, was that a task they gave to Hercules or something to clean out those stables?
Just like it's supposed to be an impossible task.
Okay,
it's
right.
So to conduct this purge, to clean up these agencies, it is an extremely difficult task. Let's be honest, and so. Yeah, Trump is faced with a real quandary here. You just have a lot of people that clearly are intent on, whose main purpose, they see their main goal in life is to actually undermine Trump, and they're within these agencies. Well, yeah, okay, he has a right to try to get rid of these people, but you can't get rid of all the experts. You can't just replace them with sycophants. This is something, but it's a problem that was created by previous administrations. Anyway, I think it has truly put our democracy in real danger. And then this, it has become much more unstable. In the end, in the past. Yeah, it was kind of boring, and there really didn't seem like much of a choice depending on who we had in power. You could say that's still true as far as our foreign policy goes, but there was this institutional stability, and okay, yeah, there were problems. There was reasons to criticize it, but all in all, these people had a pretty good understanding of the world and kept us out of world wars and so on and so forth. But that's breaking down. And, as the institutions break down, then you create this vacuum for demagogues. And I think you have to say that, Trump has some demagogic tendencies.
Without a doubt. Yeah, let's see what happens just in this, if we make it to a next election. I'm almost skeptical of whether or not we're going to have another presidential election, because I just feel like there's going to be some catastrophic war and a complete collapse before then. I hope I'm wrong. I hope we can pull back and learn how to engage in diplomacy again. But everything that I'm saying says no. But if we do have in the next election, let's say if things are just going on its current trajectory, and you have two presidential candidates and they're both extremely pro-Israel, I just don't think that will fly in America and the way that things are going. I mean, people would just be so upset. There would probably be enough people write in for a third-party candidate. Dave Smith ends up getting elected. That would be great. But it's just like, I just don't think that it would happen. But then I'm just thinking, like, if that was the case, if there was truly an anti-Israel candidate that was wanting to cut off all, aid, no more military aid, no more arms shipments to Israel, Israel will kill that, will do whatever they can to stop that person, including trying to kill them, right? I mean, we know that. We know that's true. They will stop at nothing to preserve or to expand Israel, whatever it is, to create greater Israel, to get that support. They will stop at nothing. So like, but then if they do, it just everybody knows who's doing it now, and it's just like I just don't understand that Israel is so screwed. They've overplayed their hand. People are onto them. They even like just the fact that this Charlie Kirk assassination, that there's a huge cohort of people out there that are immediately think that this was Israel. That just shows you the game is up. Even that they don't know, Israel can't do a false flag now. Because anytime there's something that happens, everybody's going to be like, yeah, you can, you say that it was this person, but we don't believe it. We believe it was you. And that fact in itself, I think, is just another nail in the coffin for Israel.
Yeah, no, I think that's important. Like personally, I don't see any evidence that Israel was behind this assassination. But I am in fact encouraged by people like you and many, many others that are just immediately pointing to Israel. And it shows that
if I was a betting man, I would bet the house. Okay. Right. I'm just
Well, I wouldn't, but that's okay in a way. I think it is a good sign. It's a healthy sign that people are suspicious of Israel. And in fact, Netanyahu was asked it directly. It shows that it wasn't just like on the very fringes of the internet or something. There was a big enough murmuring. Hey, wait a second, I bet Israel is behind this. That was it CNN or Fox News? I can't remember.
Newsmax, I think, yeah.
Okay, Newsmax, okay. But asked him directly, and he had to go, give a long explanation. And now you see all these efforts, like every day they're coming out with new, hundreds of tweets, but then murals and everything to somehow claim Charlie Kirk as one of their own and bury this. The reports from the end of his career, his last a few months that he was starting to turn against Israel. They clearly are, I think, worried about this. This is something new, and and it's, again, I think it's a healthy sign. Even if I think that this particular claim, just lacks evidence, it's just the fact that there is this real skepticism, beyond that, suspicion of Israel. It's justified. There's a reason to be suspicious of Israel because of its actions.
Yeah, just look what it's done in the past 2 years. Pager attacks, sniping children. Like, if you're okay with sniping kids,
right?
There's enough people there that are doing that they comfortable killing anybody. Yeah, they don't care.
Yeah. No, there was a report that came out.
What a horrible.
Yeah, there was a report that came out quite recently. There was a good number of international doctors who said, they observed it was well over 100 children that had just one wound. It was either a shot to the chest or a shot to the head. And they say this is sniping. This is very clear evidence of sniping. They were sniping these kids.
I heard more than that some doctors are saying that it was clear that they, on certain days, they would aim for certain parts. Like today is, we go for the neck. Tomorrow, this day, they're all headshot wounds. Next day, they're all chest wounds. It's like one where they were just going for the genitals of men. It's just so messed up, just sick.
Yeah, it is.
And do we know anything about the death toll right now in Gaza? I saw some things, people saying 680,000, and then I saw the IDF itself admitted more than 200,000.
Well, there's nothing really solid. Again, the bare minimum is what the health ministry in Gaza puts out. But we know that their capabilities are greatly limited, and we're only
five times.
And we're only talking about the direct deaths. Remember, in the end, there's going to be. It's always true of wars that there are many more indirect deaths than direct deaths. That's true of virtually every war. Now, it may not be true of the war in Ukraine, because again, actually, the civilian casualties are just unusually low in that case. But it's at the other extreme, of course, in Gaza, the civilian casualties are unusually high, and there's been this deliberate attack on the health infrastructure and just everything that makes life possible. So I'm sure that the indirect deaths will be higher, but we're like in 64,000, and that's just the bare minimum of direct deaths, and we just know it has to be higher than that. Everything else is just a guess at this point. And then as far as direct starvation deaths, people that, where the primary cause of death was starvation, I believe we're over 400, 450 at this point. aid seekers, we're at about like 2,500 aid seekers have been gunned
Oh
down.
my God.
Yeah.
It's so crazy. Yeah, I even just feel like historically, like, has there ever been anything that's just so blatantly evil? Just openly. Because a lot of times all these conflicts, they're horrific, but they're complicated. What starts it and like this, but just to me, it just seems like black and white. You just have a captive population that you held captive, and you're just slaughtering them. You're just slaughtering them. Okay, well, I think we can probably end it pretty soon, unless there's anything else you want to say, Dad.
No, I think we
Okay.
said enough for today.
Okay, sounds good. All right, have a good rest of your day, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
Okay, bye bye.
Bye bye.